Hi everyone, welcome. I'm just gonna wait a few minutes, just wait for everyone to come join us. We have a big group of painters tonight. I'm very excited. This is a really fun painting. So just get nice and comfy, get a drink, get a snack, and get your supplies all out. We'll start in just a little bit. Hi everyone. Just get comfy, get your supplies out. We're just waiting for a few more of our friends to join us. I'm super excited to paint with you today. It was so nice to see some familiar faces today, even from 6 feet away. So if you do have your supplies, if you did get a package from me today, hi. Just kind of get used to or look at your brushes. With the big packet of brushes that you got today, you know, there may be just a few. Hi Kim, hi Sarah. With the packages that you guys got today, there's tons of brushes, so you're just gonna kind of get used to, you know, which brush you like best. So we're gonna be doing a lot of playing, and this painting is perfect for that. So if you did get your package today of brushes, just, you know, have fun kind of practicing and playing with them and seeing which ones you like best. This is just one brand and one type of brush. There's so many out there. I will be listing next few days some of the supplies that I really love that you can definitely pick up on Amazon or Michael's or any other craft store. So just get used to your supplies, play with them, and we'll just get started in just a few minutes. So just get comfy, get all your supplies out. If you did get that kit today and you have your little tubs of paint, you definitely can dip on into these, but with that paper plate, I would suggest to pour a little bit out. And hi Kim. So if you're using your kit that you got today, just pour a little bit out, and you always can add more. We're going to be using lots of white, so we actually can just talk about it. If you are, hi Laura. With this painting here, if you're joining us and you don't have the kit, that's totally fine. And if you don't have all the colors that I have, hi Karen. It was so nice to see everyone today. But if you don't have the kit, don't worry about it. If you don't have all the colors, don't worry about that either. You could use your favorite colors, so make it yours. You can do this with any colors you have. The sky changes throughout the day, and you know, every beach day is different. So you know, your color sand, your sky, you could do it totally different than mine, but kind of just play with the same kind of different techniques that we're going to talk about today. Another thing that's really cool about this painting is it's kind of like almost like lazy painting, and that's kind of fun for today. I usually tell you to hold your brush nice and low like a pen or a pencil for really good control, but kind of back it down that handle and just kind of go with it. Maybe put some music on in the background and just kind of feel it and make your marks tonight. So relax, make it yours. Again, if you don't have the colors that I have, and I'll go over those now. The colors that I'm going to be using tonight: lots of white, a little bit of brown, just a little bit of black. I have a green. You could use a dark green. You have grass green or shamrock if you're using Craft Smart paint. I have a little bit of pink. You don't have to. I just kind of use it, which kind of just gave this kind of glowing effect in my clouds that I really liked. And also I have a light blue or turquoise. and I have purple, and like I said, a lot of white. Hi Mark, how are you doing today? Are you ready to paint? So today's painting is this beautiful, wispy, colorful painting of a beach, and it's a lot of fun, like I said. So instead of holding our brush nice and low, hold it back here, relax, and have fun with it. I also have a paper towel, I have a glass of water for my brushes, and I have my paint. I'll show you my palette. It's just on a paper plate, whatever you have, whatever colors. All right, I think all of our friends are here, and I think it's time to get started. So here we go. First thing we're gonna do is our horizon line, and that is where the sky meets the land or water, in this case, the water. And actually some land too. So I'm going to find about halfway down my canvas, and I'm going to be using, let me back up for a minute. I'm going to be using like 3 different size brushes today. Of course you can use whatever size you like and whatever feels good to you. But I have a couple flat brushes, and you could use in your package, you could use this one here, like the number 10, and maybe, let's see, a number 8 would be good. Just play with it, whatever feels good for you when you're using your brushes. And so I'm going to pick up just my long brush, this flat brush here, and I'm going to find the middle of my canvas, and I'm going to go find the middle on the side, and then I'm just going to move down just a little bit. So that's where my horizon line is going to be. So I'm going to find the middle, and I'm just going to move down a little bit. What color? I'm going to go dip on into that purple. Now this line, I'm going to go over a little bit later, so I don't need it to be perfect, and I also don't need it to be super dark. So this can be like almost like a pencil mark, but I'm going to use my edge of my brush. So the edge of it, think of that ice skate. And I'm going to dip a little bit into the purple, wiping the extra right off on the side of my plate. Again, finding the side or the middle of my canvas on the side, dropping it down just a little bit. Of course, this can be wherever you would like it to be. If you want to get the same measurement, let me move that over there for you. If you want to get the same measurement on the other side, you can use your paintbrush also as a ruler. And how we go about doing that, I'm just going to throw my tip of my bristles down at that dot, and then I'm going to put my finger up here. You can always grab something else around you. And then I'm just going to go on this side here if your paintbrush is short. And I'll move that camera in just a second for you. But I'm just making sure that I have the same height on both sides. Now I'm going to stand my brush up, and I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm going to slide my brush right across. I know where I'm going, and I can stop, and I can go from the other side too. And again, this mark does not have to be super heavy or super dark. We're going to go over it later. If you'd like to wrap your edges, just bring that line right on over to the sides if you want to have a nice finished edge. All right, there we go. We got it down. That was like the hardest part of this whole painting. So here we go. I'm going to put this guy down. I'm going to pick up my bigger brush. So when I'm painting, so I'm going to pick up that 10 if you have, and the 10 what I'm talking about is right here. And if you got the packet today or the kit, it's number 10 in your packet. But I'm going to use number 10, and I'm also going to use another brush, whatever brush you'd like. And I'm going to start applying my paint, and I'm going to start by adding some white into the center of my canvas in the sky. Now, my brush stroke, usually, if you've painted with me, we usually are very controlled and going side to side or one direction or the other. Today, it's going to be more of like a flip-flop kind of go for it. I'm holding my brush a little further back. Let me just pull this camera back a little bit further for you. And we're going to start with our white paint in the center of our canvas. So loading my brush on up, starting in the center, and I'm just adding some big brush strokes. You could be using your white flat brush. Laura, definitely, I would be using my flat brush. I know you have that one. And I'm just flip-flopping, focusing on the center more of my canvas. Now, this painting's really cool because we're gonna add lots of layers and we're gonna have the opportunity to go back and make parts more intense, more bright. And we also can add more to soften spots too. So our brush stroke that we're going to be doing right now isn't our final. So relax about that as well. So I'm going to start by adding a little bit of blue. So I'm going to hold off on adding anything to this one here. So I'm just going to grab another brush if you have one. If you don't, that's totally fine. And I'm going to add a little bit of purple to my, not purple, I'm so sorry, a little bit of blue to my brush. And I'm going to start right in that middle. And I'm just going to start adding some marks. I'm going to add a little bit, get a bigger brush. And I'm just going to start really flip-flopping, flip-flop, really nice and loose. And I'm going all the way out, starting to kind of blend it out a little bit. And now you're going to notice that once I start going back and forth on my paint, the more I go back and forth, right, the more it's going to start turning into one solid. Hi, how are you? So nice to see you on here. And I can't, when you come back to Plymouth, come here, all right, Alicia? So when we are starting to build our color and we are adding layers, we're going to notice that the paint starts to turn into one solid color. So if I go back now with my brush and I dipped it back into that blue, I'm going to start crisscrossing on top of it with a lighter hand, so less pressure. And what that's going to do, it's going to allow the paint to sit on the surface rather than blending on into that white on there. So now I have a little bit of lighter and I have darker. So you're like, oh, I think I got too dark. Just go ahead and add some more white. And you're going to notice the more you go back and forth on it, the more it's going to turn to one solid. So just allow it to kind of marble on there. I always can go back. So here we go. I'm going to continue and I can go back, and if your bristles are popping out, and sometimes it happens with new brushes, just use the corner and just pull those right out. I have a couple on there. And I'm going to go back to my number 10 brush and I'm going to start adding more white. And now I'm going to go kind of on the edge. And I'm overlapping on top of that blue. Just really flip-flopping and just seeing what happens, letting your paint mix. And if you want it to be a little bit more solid and flat, of course you can just change your brush stroke. That's starting to look really cool. So I'm going to continue to dip into my white and bring out on the sides. If you painted with me before, I love to do that technique of wet on wet painting, and this is totally that. We're allowing our two colors or more, 3, to blend together on the canvas. So I'm just bringing that out a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my smaller brush again, and I'm going to dip on into my purple. Now with my purple, I'm going to start on the edge, flip-flopping, and bringing it on in. And this is where I can start thinking about like how I want the purple to kind of frame my scene. There we are. So I can start thinking about how I want it to come on into my canvas. So if I stop it here, it kind of is more of an abrupt stop, but I want to kind of blend in. So at this time, I can start introducing some white and grabbing now the tips of those purples and just pulling it across. And I'm kind of doing it on an angle. And now you're like, Jackie, this is turning like, looks insane. It's gonna look a little wild, and that's what's great about this painting. It's very loose, and it's about building your colors and layering. I always say that art is very much so, problem solving, right? And being patient. And just really letting go. So I just kept going. I added a little bit of white and I pulled the edges of that purple and I just flip-flopped my brush on into the edge of my blue. And now I'm really starting to have a beautiful blend, but also really having my brush stroke is really visible. I have a lot of movement going on. And I'm going to go back and I'll continue to build up my purple. I'm just going to let it kind of dry a little bit before I add my second coat so it will really stand on top. So I'm going to just let that blend. You can blend as much as you'd like. And we always can go back. I'm going to focus a little bit more of that purple right here on the bottom edge, right above my horizon line. Of course, I can touch that horizon line and even blend it into my painting. So I'm just going back and forth, and you can have a playful kind of swishing brush stroke. And I'm just going to go all the way across. I'm adding that purple, and if your paint is wet, dry on your canvas, you always can add more of the color that's like above it. And that will allow it to have that nice blend. So I'm just bringing it over, and now I'm going to start up in this corner, dipping on into my purple. And I'm like, that's a little bit too, let me just turn that so you can see. I feel as though that this corner now is really solid. So I'm going to pick up my white brush, or I can just dip my brush directly into the white now. And I can start pulling those tips or edges, flip-flopping with some of that white. And I can go all the way to the corner because I always can bring more purple in later. It's almost like a tie-dye looking sky. Down the side here. I hope you're having a nice day. My day was very busy, but it was a really good day as well. It was nice to see that sun. So I'm just going to kind of step back and say, all right, maybe here is a little too there's a frame around this. So I kind of want to break up this center here. And of course, your painting, you'd be like, mine looks great. I don't want to touch it. That's totally fine. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to add some white if you need to give your brush a wash wipe. So let me just, I don't think I talked about washing our brushes. So a lot of times I just give my brush a nice wipe off and then go to my next color. But if I really need it to get nice and clean, I wipe off on both sides if it's a flat brush, getting all that extra paint off. This is going to save my bristles and it's going to save my water from getting too dirty. So I gave it a nice wipe, then I'm gonna give it a wash and then wipe again if you need to get it really nice and clean. A lot of times I just say, hey, and I love the colors kind of mixing together and doing whatever they wanna do, so I just give it a quick wipe and let it go. If you had purple on there and you wanted to focus again on your blue, I would definitely suggest to wipe, wash, wipe. I'm going to start kind of breaking up, adding a little bit more of a wispy cloud look to this middle area here. And if you don't have paint and you'd like to use colored pencils, pastels, markers, crayons, it's a lot of fun, and you definitely can do any of these paintings or pictures with other materials. So feel free to try that. So I'm just going to go in and just kind of playing with that brush stroke. Again, holding my brush a little further back than normal. I know it might feel funny, but it's really fun. So give it a shot. And I can start blending out those edges a little bit more. I can do like a few brush strokes and see what happens, making some little clouds, blending out those edges. This is very kind of like abstract and free. So your marks may be a little bit different than mine, and that's perfect. Maybe I'll introduce a little bit more blue and pull it over here. Play with your different directions. Again, this isn't our final pass through our sky. I mean, you could wake up tomorrow morning and say, ooh, I think I want to darken this area here. That is fine, absolutely. I always find that, once I'm looking at my painting for an hour or so, it's good to take a break and step away, and even the next morning, see what, I see things differently. You see your painting totally different. And a lot of times I'm really happy in the morning, actually, after, looking at it for so long. I'm pleasantly surprised, because you get hard on yourselves when you start talking, like, I can't do this, or this doesn't look right. But if we just kind of let ourselves go and allow ourselves to just move that paint, Alicia, if you're still watching, how did your class go? Let me know. I'm dying to hear. Alicia had a painting class today. Who's watching? So I'm just kind of playing, again, stepping back. I think I want to add a little bit more white here. And if you're finished, go grab yourself another snack or drink. So allow your canvas to dry for a few. And of course, our canvases aren't stuck on our easels, or if it's on your table, pick it up every once in a while. It's interesting to see if your painting is flat on your table, to pick it up every once in a while, because your eye is playing kind of like a trick on you. And so if you're doing like a circle and you pick up your painting after it's laying flat and you're doing that circle, when you pick it up, you might be like, ooh, that's an oval. So definitely move your canvas around, because it's good to see it from different angles as well. One other trick that's really cool, take a picture of it with your phone and then look at it on your phone, and you'll be like, oh yeah, I don't know why I didn't see that. Or another trick is hold it with the mirror behind you, or no, how would you do that? Yeah, the mirror, looking at it in the mirror is very interesting. You see things all different. So those are two different tricks, taking a picture or looking at it in the mirror. And also definitely turn it around. It's not stuck. All right, so I'm happy happy with it so far. I might go back in, add a little bit more to darken some areas or even lighten some. But let's go ahead and let's now focus on the sand, because the water comes up on the sand. So I'm going to add my sand first, and then we'll put the water on top. So my sand color, I'm just going to be using white and brown. If you have yellow or orange with you, you can absolutely add those. You could do some little tests. But with this painting here, I found that just using brown and white got the look that I was looking for. And I'm going to put down my bigger brushes. I'm going to find kind of a smaller brush because I want to have a little bit more control in this part of my land out here. I could have a couple on deck, bigger one for my sand down here. When I'm working, I want to think about what's the best size brush for the area that I'm working on. So keep that in mind. So I'm just going to give my brush a quick little whitewash wipe, and then we'll get started on our sand. Take your time. Remember, we always can go back. Just going to give my brushes a quick little wash. All right. So for my horizon line, or my land that's out there in that horizon line, I'm going to be using a smaller brush, just so I have a little bit more control. And I'm going to slowly build up the height of my land. So the first thing I'm going to do is start by just getting the length of my land down. Then I can take a step back and look at how I want my land to, if I want it to be flat, or if I want to have some sand dunes or hills. You even could add, you can change this and add trees out there, whatever you want. This is yours. So I'm going to bring my land out to almost about halfway across my canvas. So you can decide to kind of look at your canvas and say, do I want to go right to the middle, or do I want to move over a little bit to the side, or a little bit further than halfway? Just make that decision. And with my color, I'm going to start with like a medium light brown. So that's going to be the white and brown. And you could, if you'd like, just mix it on your plate, just in a little spot. And I'm just going to wipe on both flat sides, just to get the extra paint off. So now I have my brush all ready. And I'm going to just decide where I want my land to stop. So I'm going to stop like right about halfway, right on that edge where the sky, our horizon line. So I'm going to just go ahead and draw my line. And if you're coloring the sides, just bring that right over. If you're finishing the sides, bring that line right over. So now I have the length. Now I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of interest to my top of my land here. I have a few little hills. Sometimes you get excited and you may make the same hump or bump all the way across. That's cool, but I like to kind of slow it down and really be aware of your mark. Be aware of your bumps in your land. And I'll bring you closer just so you can see. And one other thing that I like to do in my land like this is, as I get to the tip of my land, I like to flatten it out, get a little bit closer and closer to that horizon line until it just hits that horizon line. Just kind of adds a nice little finish to it. You may have a cliff on yours. That's cool too. So I'm going to go ahead, add that light brown again to my brush. And my land is going to be no more than an inch high. So a half inch high for my highest points. So I'm just going to bring it up, and I'm just going to create a little, and as I get closer to my end, I'm going to start flattening that out. So getting closer, closer, closer until I just go right to that flat point. And if you need to pull that flat point out a little bit further, feel free. I just think it has a more natural look to let it just kind of flatten out. And I'm just going to fill in, and if your paint is very wet, you have your sky there, you could let it dry and then fill in. Mine's pretty dry, so I'm just going to go ahead and give that a fill in. I'm going to add some highlights to this area, or maybe even some shadows. So again, this isn't my final, and actually having a little bit of that purple kind of mix in was really interesting. Just kind of add a little bit of wet purple on there, and I really like how that looks. So hey, maybe I'll leave it like that. All right, so I have my gentle slopes, my sand dunes way out there. And now I'm going to go ahead and add that land line here, our shore line here. Now again, I'm going to find the end point to the bottom of my water. You could do it directly below your point here, or I'm just going to bring mine out a little bit further. So I found my point, and I can move over a little bit more, and then I'm going to find the bottom. So that's going to be the bottom edge of my shoreline here. And I'm going to find, maybe 2 or 3 inches from the edge. So going across about 3 inches in on my horizon line, that's where I'm going to start. So I have my start point and I have my end point. I can just do a gentle curve, or at this point I could make my where the water has come in and add some of these bumps, or I can wait and put the water on top. It's whatever makes you happy. I'm going to do like a gentle curve, so I know where I'm starting. I moved about 3 inches in on my horizon line, and then I found the tip of my land here, and I just moved over a little bit and then dropped it down, and that's going to be the end point of my shore. So here we go. Take a deep breath. Use your finger first. Draw it with your finger. Picture it. In this line, I'm going to paint over it so I know I don't need it to be, it doesn't have to be too heavy. Or I can just change it whenever I want right now. So I'm going to paint over it. All right. Let's go ahead and start adding our sand, which I'm going to make my mark right to left or flat, because I want this to kind of look like it's on the ground, right? I don't want it to be up in the air and fluffy like my sky. I want my sand to be nice and flat. So you can pick up a bigger brush if you have your white grip brush, or maybe like the 10, or whatever brush actually that makes you feel good. I'm going to use some white on my brush, and I'm also going to add some of that brown. This time I'm going to let it blend on my canvas rather than blending it on my plate, then putting it on my canvas. So I'm going to have my brown and my white. And I'm just allowing it to marble and blend. I'm keeping my mark flat. I'm welcoming any of the dark and light areas. I always can go back and add more brown or more white. Paint those sides if you're doing so. You can change your shoreline. I am going to put my water on top of it, so just brushing it in. Keeping that nice and flat, allowing it just kind of marble on there, allowing there to be lights and darks. And just like we did in our sky, you're going to notice that if you keep working it, it's going to turn to one solid color. If you just kind of go a few times back and forth, you're going to see more variations. So just play with that. If you're painting the sides, go for it. And right here at the bottom where my my beach meets my sand dunes, I'm going to add just a little bit of a darker edge or a line right at the base of my sand dunes, and I'll blend it a little bit. Another way to blend is I'll just wipe off my brush. So I have my dark on there, my dark brown, and now I just wipe my brush off, and I'm just gonna kind of work it. And that's just by wiping my brush off, it just took off the extra paint, and it allowed me really to mix in what I had on my canvas rather than adding more. And I might have to add, or I might go back and add a little bit more to that to make it stand out a little later. But for now, I think that looks great. And I'm going to continue to play with my sand. I'm going to add a little bit more white just to kind of soften this here. And if you wanted to give your sand dunes a second coat or add a little bit of white to it, just to show that they're getting a little bit more light than your sand. Or if you want them to be darker, absolutely. Also start thinking about where your lighthouse is going to be. You could have it further back, you could have it out here, you could even have it like Bug Light is in Plymouth, in the water, whatever you'd like. But you can start thinking about that, and if you need to flatten anything out or change your landline at all to add your lighthouse, which is very simple. It's kind of fun to do too. I'll show you how to go about making your lighthouse in just a little bit. And if you're like, oh, like mine here, my land is a little high over here, I don't mind it. But if I was like, oh, I really wish I could make that a little bit smaller. If you want to fix something or change something, there's a few different things you can do. One is taking a little piece of paper towel and just wiping out some of your paint. Your second option, you could let it dry and then paint over it. I just don't suggest adding more and more layers of paint if you're trying to change anything. I would definitely let it dry. I say, you know, kind of if you're adding layers and layers and layers trying to change something, it's almost like if you have a cut and you just keep adding another Band-Aid on top rather than changing it. You just have a stack of Band-Aids. So either take the Band-Aid off by taking a little piece of paper towel, wiping it out. If you have a Q-tip, sometimes that's nice to use. Or taking a dry brush, picking that up. And sometimes you need to use a little white out, just wipe it out and then add a little bit of white paint, nice and flat, and then let that dry and then paint over it. So patience. Of course, hair dryer is helpful. So if you have a hair dryer, feel free to use that at any time. So I have my land down. I have my sand. It looks good. If I wanted later on, I could totally go back and add, you know, a little bit more white here or there. I think that looks good. I like all those very, you know, darks and lights. I feel as though it shows that there might be some dips in the sand, which are creating some shadows. And we'll add even some wet sand to our canvas in just a little bit. So it's time to start thinking about our water. So I'm going to just wash wipe my brushes because we're going to go to our cool colors now. So I'm just going to give my brush a quick little wipe and a wash and a wipe again. And you can pick up either your white grip brush or your number 10 for our big areas. Have a few brushes handy. All right, so we're going to start by adding our lighter blues, and just like we've done in our painting so far, we're going to kind of play with it and build it up and add layers. So I'm going to start with white and blue. I'm going to use a bigger brush. So I have white. If you need to add more white, if your white is a little dirty, you can always grab another plate or palette or wipe out that dirty part of your paint. So I have white on there, and now I'm going to add a little bit of that turquoise or some light blue. And I'm going to focus in this end of my water. And I'm just going to continue adding my white and blue. Again, allowing it to kind of marble on my canvas. And I'm going to take it a little bit slower as I go closer to my horizon line or my land way out there. Just keep that nice and flat. And this is where we can start thinking about that edge of our shoreline here. Our other tool other than our paintbrushes is definitely our finger. I like to really envision and kind of draw with my finger, even if you're hovering above your canvas, seeing how that curve is going to happen. So I am going to paint my water up on top of my sand. You don't have to. You could just bring it right to your edge if you're happy with your edge of your sand. But I'm going to bring mine on top. So I pictured it. I'm going to use that same white and blue combo. And I'm going to add a curve that's going to come out here. Just switch over this side. So a curve that's going to come onto my beach. And my water is going to go back out. And it's going to come back on. Maybe I'll bring this out a little bit more. Bring this out. Clean up that edge. Now, just like with our sand, I kept that nice and flat. I'm going to do the same thing to start here. So really think about how that water moves. It goes on and then it pulls back, right? So I'm just pulling my water, keeping it nice and flat. I'll add some waves in just a moment. But I'm focusing this light blue, it's my turquoise and my white, on this half of my water. You could have switched it totally. That feels good. All right, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop adding that white and I'm going to dip right on into my pure turquoise, light blue, or whatever color you're using. And I'm going to start working this way. So I'm starting to brush into my light blue. So I'm starting in my dry canvas. Taking it nice and slow when I get to where my sky meets my water. Slow it down, find a brush that feels good, and you have nice control. And like we did where we talked about blending, so I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to give it a quick wipe, and now where the light blue and the dark blue meet, or the white and blue and the pure blue meet, I'm going to I wipe my brush off, and now I'm going to dust away. I'm going to wipe it off again because I just got a lot of paint on there, picked it up. So I'm going back and forth, letting it blend together, losing that separation or where those two colors met, and now it's a seamless transition from dark to light. So what I did was I wiped off my brush and then I just started sweeping away. I'm using the tips of my bristles. And now I have that nice transition. So I have a little bit left of my canvas. You might have brought your paint all the way to the edge, and that's fine. But I noticed when I'm here in Plymouth looking out into the water that the water has kind of like this greenish color to it, this tint to it. If you would like to add what I did over here, all I'm going to do is add a little bit of green to my brush. And I'm going to start at the end of my canvas, the side of my canvas, and I'm going to do the same thing that we just did. I'm going to put that paint on the edge. When I get to that horizon line where the sky meets the water, slow it down. I find that when you look out into the water where the sky meets the water, it's very flat. Even when it's waves out there, it's still nice and flat, way, way out there. So I have my green. Let me turn that a little bit for you. There it is. Now I can start pulling again into, and if you need to wipe off your brush, feel free. And we can start building this up. So if you're like, well, that didn't do too much, I didn't have very much on there, I can do the same thing. I'm going to start with that green. I'm going to add it to the edge of my canvas. And I'll pull across. If you're like, oh no, I think I got really, really green over there, I can add more blue, right? And I'm going to take mine a step further. And I'm going to add a little bit of black. Now, black is super intense. So just like we did on the edge here and pulled, we're going to do the same thing with that black. So if you're going to add the black into it, maybe you're going to focus only closer to your horizon line and then just add a little bit as you go down. Or if you want, you could add a whole bunch. But I suggest to build it up slowly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush, and if there's a lot of paint on there, just give it a quick little wipe. But I'm going to dip it, just not too much, just a little bit, into the black. And I'm going to start focusing on my top edge over here. And I'm just going to add a little bit. I'm going to do this slowly because we know that black is super intense. And if you wanted to use a different color, you could try some purple. That might be cool. But I'm going to add this little bit of black. So I have my black on there, just like we've done before, wiping off the extra paint. Now I'm going to start pulling, and I have my brush, my handle, I'm holding it a little bit further back, using the tips. Once I get close to my horizon line, I'll slow down just so I have a little bit more control. But I'm just pulling. And as I get closer to that horizon line, I'm going to pull that a little bit further and lift up. And then I'll move down a little bit more. And I'm going to start getting shorter and shorter swipes as I go. So my longest point in my painting is closest to my horizon line. And as I go down, they get shorter. And you can just see what you have on your brush. Maybe you have enough just on your brush and pulling it, or if you're like, I want a little bit more, just add just a tiny bit, maybe wipe it off a little bit, and then start by adding it just on that edge, pulling it across. Again, I kind of brought my furthest point is the closest to my horizon line. And if you're like, oh boy, I'm not quite sure about that, you always can just let that dry and then add more of your blues and greens. So don't panic. And remember, it's problem solving and being patient. So I'm just pulling. I can build it up if I want. I can add more. I could even add, you can add some, white closer to the bottom of your canvas. If you have lots of black on there, definitely give it a wipe wash white. You can start kind of playing, step back. All right, nice. All right, so I'm pretty happy with it so far. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, before I add my waves coming in. And I'm going to go back down to my water's edge because I'm just going to add a little bit, and you don't have to do this if you don't want, but I do have a little bit showing in this part of my canvas, and I could add more if I wanted to. And that is when the water comes up onto the sand and then goes back out, the sand is left wet. And when the sand is wet, it's darker than the dry sand, right? So what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of that darker sand on the edge, just saying yes on to the sand and did go back. So I can, I just have a little bit of brown. I could add a little bit of white too if my sand is very light. You don't want it too much of a difference. But I'm just going to add, it doesn't have to be the same thickness either. And maybe just here and there. So I'm just kind of going right around the edge of my water. And I'm just going to do it kind of like on this bottom half. I'll let that be. I'm going to say that's too far away and I really can't see it. Hi, Pa. How are you? So I have my wet edge, and that makes me happy. I think that looks good. At this time, I'm still letting my water dry just a little bit. This is a great time to go into my sky and add any other little highlights or any more clouds if you want to add any, or you can wait till later. But I might add a little bit here. Of course, make sure, you know what we didn't use, which might be nice now, to use if you wanted to use a little bit of that pink and just kind of hit it in that. You even can add some white to your brush too, but just hit it on like the tops of your purples. And what that's going to do is it's going to kind of illuminate your clouds, or you can put it wherever you like. You could take a moment and just kind of play with your sky, or if you wanted to add anything to your sand. Or if there's anything else that you can think of that you want to add or change. Like that. And of course, like I said, I can always go back and play with my sky, my water, my sand at any time. Tomorrow morning, later on tonight. All right, so while you're working on your sky or sand, I'm going to just talk about my water. And I'm going to start adding some more movement. It's pretty still right now. So by adding some more marks into my water, I'm going to show a little bit more movement, which is going to kind of tie our whole canvas all together. Because I have a lot of movement in my sky. I do have some movement or different colors or variations in my sand, but I really want to show a little bit more to tie it all together. So I'm going to pick up a smaller brush. I have this guy here. I'm going to give him a quick little wash. This, you could use a round brush, you could use whatever feels good to you. And I'll show you, and then you can kind of decide. And of course you can practice if you have some paper on your table, or if you do have just some scrap paper or canvas around. Feel free to play before you go up on your art, your work. So I am going to start adding some layers and some more movement into my water. I'm going to start with some white, and I'm going to be very light with my hand. So I'm not going to push down too hard, and I can wipe off the extra paint, or we can maybe start by doing almost like a dry brush. So very little paint, just letting it kind of grab the canvas tooth, grab the paint. So I'm just going to follow this edge here, and I can kind of overlap on my on my sand a little bit. I can change, I can add another little wiggle onto my sand. I'm starting to add a little bit of that foam maybe that has piled up on the edge of my water. And you can play with the amount and how thick, and of course you always can kind of fade it out as well by just pulling it the same direction that your water's in. And my curves in my water are almost like kind of like W's or M's or Z's, and they're just elongated. So just kind of play with it and think about how that water is being pulled and pushed, right? So I have this wave coming in, and I'm gonna just kneel just so I can have a better angle. And I'm just going to add almost like I have like a little wiggle or kind of like M's. And I can soften this and change it, of course. And I'm going to elongate that and just follow my curve. So when I'm closer to my water, like this curve looks bigger. And as I look down, those wiggles, those curves, those waves start looking a little bit closer together because they're further away, right? So as I come further or closer to my water, I'm going to see that curve just straighten out just a little bit or elongate. So I'm just going to play by adding some movement and think about the angle. Maybe I'll add one here. So these little M's or W's are going to be a little bit closer. And as they come closer to the bottom of my canvas, I'm going to kind of straighten them out or elongate them and just feeling the curve. I'm going to start introducing some purple. I have that white on my brush. I have purple now. And I'm just going to start by adding maybe some reflection or just some interest. And if you're like, oh boy, I don't know what I'm doing, just trust and just let it go. Just go for it. And if your water is very wet and you're like, it's all just blending, just let it dry. So just continuing to build up, adding maybe some more purple. Stepping back and seeing if I want to change anything or add more. That looks kind of cool. And back here, I'm just going to add a little bit of purple and start pulling. You don't have to do this, but I'm just going to kind of push this down a little bit by adding this purple. This is my darkest area, right way up there. And I always can add a little bit more blue. I can add some of that green. I can add whatever is needed. That's coming together nicely. There we go. You can add some more white to my edge. I can say that maybe the water came on and it went back, but there's maybe a little bit still out on that sand. And I just lightly added a little bit of paint to the edge following my curve there. Just showing that there might be some water pooling on my shoreline. Take a step back. And when you're painting, just be aware of what part of the brush you're using, right? So are you using the whole width of your brush, or are you using that edge, or are you using a combo? And it's nice to use both, but just be aware, and when you're trying to get a thin line, use that edge. And if you're like, oh, my brush is getting, it's too saturated, I really want a bright white here. And I think I do actually want a little bit more of a highlight towards that bottom. So I'm just gonna let that dry. So I'm just gonna step back from my water for a moment. And if you're finding that your horizon line needs a little bit of a cleanup, this is when you can go back in. And I know I have purple and white on my brush up there, so I can kind of clean that up. Of course, you can go back to your water or your sky, but we're going to take a moment and just go over our steps to our lighthouse. Very, very simple. It's tiny, so I don't need too much because it's so small that our eye totally reads. We know it's a lighthouse. We know it has windows. It has a roof. It has a little house attached to it. So I don't need to add shingles, and I don't need to add shutters or a door or anything like that. I mean, you totally could. You could make it a lot bigger, but it's so far away that I really don't need to have so many details, and I still know what it is. Of course, you could take it a step further and you could have rocks around it. You could do whatever you want, make it yours. But I'm just going to show you very, very simple how to make your lighthouse. And this is, I'd be using a tiny little detail brush. And to do our small little details, I will be holding my brush a little further down. So like a pen or a pencil, just have a little bit more control. Another trick with our detail brush is once I dip it in to the paint, pretend that this is our palette, I would roll it on the side, just kind of like sharpening a pencil. And that will get the extra paint off and will make my point very pointy. And that will get me some nice detail. And also with our detail brush, you want to feel as though you're tickling your canvas. So I like to say, nice and light. So if I'm tickling someone, that feels good. If you push down too hard, it doesn't feel good. And so barely let your bristles bend, and you'll get a really nice thin controlled line. So that being said, I'm going to show you, instead of using white, I'm going to, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use a Sharpie, I think, just to draw it on my paper, and then I'll do it up there with you, and I'll bring the camera right on up. So with my finger here, I can kind of show you how big this is. So it is tiny. It is just very, very small, and it's very simple. So the first part of my lighthouse, and I would practice on paper first, just kind of get it down. Very simple, is to add the body of my lighthouse, which is made up of just a few lines. So I have my diagonal down. This is going to be the side, and I could do how wide it's going to be at the top. Now, the bottom of my lighthouse is slightly bigger than the top. Not by a whole bunch, just a little bit. So I know that this is going to be that wide. So now all I'm going to do is do the other angle down, just like that. And I would be doing this on my canvas with white paint, but you can watch first. And then I know my lighthouse is round, so by adding a little smile or a curve to the bottom of my lighthouse, I'll get that roundness. And I'll fill that in with white. So that would be all white. I have white on my brush. I'm going to add to the little house next to it, which I'm just going to move up on the side of my lighthouse just a little bit. And I'll pull that right across. And this is tiny too. Just kind of showing you. And now I'm going to do the side and the bottom, just like that. And again, that will be all white. and I will repeat this on the canvas. So my lighthouse, I'm going to switch colors now with my paintbrush. I have my detail brush. I'm dipping into the black, and I'm going to add a very little rectangle at the top, the same width as the top of my lighthouse. I'll fill that in with the black. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add, with the tips of my bristles, just a little line on both sides. This is going to be where the light is going to be in my lighthouse. So I want the roof of my lighthouse to have a little bit of space between the body and the top. So I have, this is all white, I have my little black stripe, and then I have these two little lines on the side. Now I'm going to add the top, which is going to have a flat. My lighthouse here has a triangle for its roof. I've seen rounded as well. Whatever you would like your lighthouse top to be. And then I'm going to go to the roof of my house, and I'm going to do just an angle and then a flat line. And that will be all dark too. Now you could have, if you wanted to do like a stripe, or you could do stripes going flat across, or you could add maybe a swirling. If you wanted to, you could do black, or if you had red, you could add that, or you could just keep it white like how I have it in mine. So just to show you one more time. Curve, and then I would add my little house. I'd add my little rectangle here, black, two little lines on the side, then my roof, fill that in, diagonal and a flat for my roof of my little house. And in mine, I added a window here, which is just a little line, another line here for my window, and I added two down here. So I'm going to show you up there with the paint. So I'm going to be using my detail brush. In my painting here, I just used black and white. Of course, you could add whatever colors you wanted to your lighthouse. Let me jump in with you. And of course, you can be working, if you're like, I already did it, it's done. You can grab and start working on any more details into your painting. But to start, I'm going to start with my detail brush. I have white on my brush, and I'm going to start with that base or the body of my lighthouse. I'm going to find somewhere towards the end of my peninsula here, and I want to make sure that my lighthouse isn't floating. It's sitting in that sand. So I'm going to start by adding my diagonal, a slight diagonal up, and this is little, it's tiny, so don't even worry about it. Your eye will read it as a lighthouse. And I'm going to do the top flat line, barely letting my bristles bend. And I'm going to do the diagonal on the other side, just a slight diagonal down. And I'm going to add a smile or a curve to the bottom of my lighthouse, because I know that that is round, and that will give me a little bit of a round feel. So I have that little kind of a cone or the triangle-ish shape for the base of my lighthouse, and I'm filling that in. And I can slow it down. And since I have white on my brush, I'm going to continue on to my little house that's attached, and that is just a little rectangle right off of it. And if you're like, oh no, my lighthouse and my house kind of smushed together, you could add a slight little line or a little outline on the edge of your lighthouse, maybe a light gray, and just kind of let it fade away, but just kind of show that they're two different buildings. So I really pictured how big I wanted this house. I did it with my finger first, hovered it right above. I'm going to bring it up a little bit. It's not going to be any, it's only like about half up my lighthouse, the roof line. So it's pretty short, this little rectangle. All right. And now I'm going to go ahead and add the black. So I wiped off my brush. And I remember how I talked about rolling our brush on our palette, allowing the extra paint to come off, making our point of our brush so we can get a nice controlled mark. And I'm going to go ahead and add that tiny little rectangle right at the top of my white lighthouse. And then I'm going to add those two little lines on both sides, just so it's separating the roof and the rest of my lighthouse, so I can have that light, the space for my light. And then I'll add the bottom of my roof, which is a straight line across, connecting those lines. And I'm going to add a triangle for that top. Yours could be rounded. And just fill that in. And I'm going to go ahead to my house, and I'm just going to outline the top, add that angle up and that top line using the tips of my bristles. If your paint is starting to dry, of course you can add just the tiniest drop of water, and just make sure you don't have any drips. So just touch your paper towel before going to your canvas. But sometimes your paint gets a little sticky. And I'm going to add those two little lines for my windows. I staggered mine. You could do yours right on top of each other. And then I have two windows in my house. And if you wanted to have a little bit of that separation of your lighthouse and house, I just added, created a little bit of a gray. Sarah, that's okay that you got a little lost. You can always, try again, let it dry, and then just try it again. So don't worry about that. Yes, I can show it again on the paper. Absolutely. All right, here we go. So that lighthouse, don't overthink it. It's tiny, it's far away, and I don't see too much detail. So the first mark, or I can just kind of picture how wide I want it, right? It's small. And I'm going to do a slight angle. Or if you wanted to say start by adding the top of your lighthouse, just so you know how wide you're going to be, right? That might be helpful. So that's the top. Then I can do an angle down, keeping it nice and tight. You don't have to get too wide. And another. Then I have the bottom, which I do a slight little smile. And I fill that all in white. Since I have white on my brush, I'm going to continue on to the little house. You could say, I don't want that little house. You just do your lighthouse. So I'm just going to add right down here, it's very small, a little rectangle. And I'll fill that in white. I'm going to wipe off my brush. I'm using my detail. And I'm going to add just a little rectangle right on the top there. And I'll fill that in with the black. And if you let your painting dry completely, of course you can use a Sharpie if you want to have a little bit more control. So I added my rectangle, and now I'm going to go ahead and add these two little lines using the tips of my bristles, not overthinking it. And then I'm going to add that top. So that's where my light will be, in that little space there. And then this is my roof of my lighthouse. I'll fill that in with black. And the roof of my house, I'm going to do a slight angle in and a line over. And I'll fill that in with the black. And like I said, you could add some stripes straight across or on an angle if you want to get a little fancy with your lighthouse. I'm going to keep mine nice and simple and just keep little windows. You could do it right on top of each other, but I added a little staggered, and mine were so small that they really were just little dashes. So a line and a line. And then I added some windows over here too. And of course they can just be little dots or dashes as well. And that's all. So it's super small, super far away. And I'm just gonna add in mine, I wanted to show a little bit of a separation from the side of my lighthouse to the other part of the house. You don't have to, but I just feel as though if I had a little bit of a light gray line, that it will really help define one from the other. So with my detail brush, which I'm not sure where I put, here it is. So I have a gray, which is white and black, and I'm going to roll that right on my plate like I'm sharpening a pencil. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add just a slight line right on the side there. I don't have to, but I'll bring you up close to it so you can see. And, you know, it doesn't have to look like much close up, but when I'm sitting on my couch looking at my painting, it's going to read totally as a lighthouse. So let me just bring you right on up there. So you can see my little line I just added for a little bit of definition from my little house over here and there. And when I step back, it looks great. But, you know, up front, it's pretty, you know, don't worry about it because we're going to sit on our couch and look at our painting. So at this time, I can add anything else I want, including some birds, which I'll show you real quick. So with my birds, I'm going to use my detail brush again, and I'm going to use the very tips of my bristles. I'm going to show you with my Sharpie first, and then I'll go ahead up on my canvas. Now, I like to kind of show you that, you know, you could do like big birds like that, but I like to keep mine very small. And I also like to keep their wings pretty flat. I can have some, you know, flying with their wings like that, but one thing I noticed, so if I had this pretend that's not really there, but we have this little line right on our canvas, and my bird, check out how flat these wings are, right? So I don't have to have too much of like a big arch in order for them to have like a beautiful bird look to them. So I'm keeping them nice and flat and small. And I also can mix in some more bigger V's, but I'm going to keep these very small. I have 3 in my sky over here. And of course you could add more, you know, with your detail brush, or you could use your Sharpie, whatever feels good to you. And I'm just going to go ahead and add just a few birds with my detail and my black paint. You could use a light gray, a dark gray, or even white if you have a lot of color in your sky. I'm going to add my black using the tips of my bristles, and I'm going to find wherever I'd like them to be flying in my sky, keeping them nice and small, thinking about how they're kind of turning and soaring. And I think that looks great. So at this time, you can add any other details you'd like. If you have a boat floating out there, feel free. If you want to play with your waves a little bit more, add more to your sky, whatever feels good or whatever your painting is calling for. But I hope you had fun. This was a little bit more playful of a painting. And just thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night. And I hope to paint with you all again soon. It was so nice to see you all today. And I hope to be painting with you all in person very soon. All right, my friends. Thank you and have a good night. Bye.